The Force is old and full of shadows.
The first thing that comes back is pain. Not the remembered agony of chemicals and dead nerves and a body held together by machinery that kept him breathing and called it mercy. Something rawer than that. Something almost innocent. The scrape of sand against skin that has no right to be intact. The press of heat against a face that should not be capable of feeling anything. Anakin Skywalker digs his fingers into the desert floor and does not move. For a long time, long enough that the twin suns have shifted a fraction across the white sky above him, he simply breathes. In and out. The air is hot and mineral dry, coating the back of his throat, and he breathes it anyway. Open atmosphere, no filtration system. No mechanical rhythm measuring his lung capacity in tenths of a percent. Just heat and baked stone dust and the low-frequency cycling of a moisture evaporator somewhere below the ridge, patient and indifferent, and decades of the same work ahead of it. He opens his eyes. Twin suns. White sky pressed flat from above. The amber curve of a dune sweeping away toward a ridge of dark rock to the east. Jagged and absolute against the horizon. He already knows where he is. Not from the visual data, from somewhere older. From the base of the hindbrain, where certain places live beneath the thinking mind, where the body stores coordinates that the memory never earned, and the marrow carries anyway. He has known this sky since before he understood what sky meant. He knows it the way lungs know breath. He pushes himself upright. And stops. His right hand is in front of his face. He turns it over. Turns it back. Turns it over a third time with the deliberate concentration of a man verifying something he has been told not to trust. 10 fingers on 2 hands. Both of them. Flesh. No seams, no dead circuitry threading from wrist toward shoulder. Palm lines tracing a life that had not yet been destroyed. The hands of a man who once stood at the full height of everything he could have been, and then made the worst choice available to a person, and then, somehow, at the very end of everything, didn't. He makes a sound. He doesn't intend to. It comes out like something fracturing rather than anything resembling a word. And he has no time to be ashamed of it, because 10 meters to his left a lightsaber ignites. 2 of them. White. She comes up from the desert floor like a tide reversing. White Lekku. Robes the color of clean bone, both blades burning in her hands before her feet have finished finding the ground beneath her. Lit on instinct. Held on training so deep it doesn't require thought. She's on her feet and armed before she draws her second breath, and then she turns and finds him. Neither of them speaks. The wind moves between them, carrying a thin skin of sand off the dune's surface. Somewhere past the eastern ridge, a moisture evaporator runs through its readout sequence. Flat, mechanical, wholly indifferent to the 2 people standing in the desert looking at each other across a distance that has nothing to do with meters. He has never seen this version of her. He knows that with the same certainty, he knows the sky. He knows it means she lived decades he never saw. Walked through years he missed entirely, grew into something ancient and luminous while he rotted inside a machine that kept him breathing and called it second chances. All of that arrives in a single moment. Carried in the white of her Lekku and the set of her jaw and the way she holds those blades. Not the ready stance of someone afraid of what's in front of her, but the readiness of someone who has already made peace with every version of afraid. 10 seconds pass. Maybe more. Then his knees give. Not from weakness. He has long since passed weakness. This is something else, the collapse of every wall he ever built, because every wall he ever built was made of fear. And fear requires something left to lose, and standing here in this body with both hands intact, and the force running through him like a river suddenly returned to its original course, there is nothing left to protect against. And the walls don't know what to do with the absence of their purpose. He is a man on his knees in the sand. She is alive. Snips, he said. The word comes out cracked. He tries again. Snips. She crosses the distance in 4 steps and says nothing, and drops in front of him and pulls him in with both arms. He grips the back of her robe with both hands. Both hands. And the lightsabers extinguish quietly as they fall, and neither of them registers it. He doesn't count how long they stay like that. She is the one who holds him up. She has always been better at this than him. "I know," she said finally, her voice close and low and steady in a way his isn't. "I know. I already know. I'm sorry." He pulls back enough to say it properly, to make it land. "Ahsoka, what I became, what I did, I know." She looks at him. Her eyes are blue-gray and sharp and completely present. The eyes of someone who has looked away from hard things exactly once in her life and spent everything that followed making sure it never happened again. "I had a long time. More than you'd think. Long enough to do every piece of the work." Something moves behind the steadiness. Not pain, but something older than pain that has been converted into something more useful. That peace we both finally reached at the end of it. I think that's why we're here. Whole, he looks at her face and sees all those missing decades in it, and he breathes through that weight the way you breathe through something enormous and irreversible. The way you breathe through grief after it has stopped being acute and simply become true. "Where?" he began. She looked up. He followed her gaze. 2 sons. The recognition didn't ease in. It landed all at once, with the full tonnage of everything this place had ever done to him. Childhood, slavery, his mother's voice through a low doorway, engine grease on his hands before dawn, and beneath all of it, the specific terror of loving a place that did not love you back. It slammed into him, and the desert tilted slightly. "Tatooine," he said. "Tatooine," she confirmed. Her voice went careful and clear, the voice she used when the intelligence was unreliable and the mission was already live. "Listen, from beyond the eastern ridge, thin on the wind, a moisture farmer's comm unit recited the date in the flat procedural tones of an automated readout. A generation before the galaxy fractured. A lifetime before the dark." He said nothing for a long count. The number arranged itself against everything he carried. Qui-Gon on a ship that hadn't landed yet, his mother in a shop she didn't know she'd be free of, a boy with grease on his elbows who didn't know the galaxy had decided to use him as its turning point. "She's alive," he said, "not a question." "Right now?" "Yes." Ahsoka's hand settled on his shoulder, steady, deliberate, carrying the full weight of "I've got you. So is everyone." He gets to his feet. One try. The body is strong, the force moving through it without obstruction, no damaged architecture, no dead nerves fighting the connection. He reaches for it, and it comes like a river reaching back, vast and immediate. And for a moment the scale of it nearly drops him again. She retrieves both lightsabers and holds his out. His hand closes around the hilt. "No counsel," he said. "No politics," she replied. No hesitation. She looked at him with the expression of a person who has done every necessary reckoning and arrived on the other side with enough left to stand. "The Force didn't give us a second chance," Ahsoka said. "It gave the galaxy one." He turned the saber over once, felt its balance. Familiar and strange simultaneously, the way home always is after a very long time away. They gripped forearms, the grip of soldiers and not ceremony, a pact sealed without ritual because ritual had never been what they were about, and set off toward the shimmer of Mos Espa on the horizon, and the desert opened before them like a question about to be answered. Mos Espa announces itself long before it appears. The smell arrives first, exhaust, roasting meat, and something fermented that no one who values their peace of mind investigates further. Then sound. The layered commerce of a market that operates in the gaps between sleep and waking, vendor calls stacking over speeder whines over the patient grinding of machinery completing its programmed work. Then color, mud brick orange and canvas awnings bleached to near nothing by years of double sun afternoons, bodies moving through narrow corridors with the efficient, accustomed ease of people who stopped resenting the city's heat decades ago and renegotiated the terms into something livable. Anakin walks through it and his feet know every turn. That is the worst part. Not the recognition. He braced himself for recognition. What he didn't prepare for is the body's independent memory, the way it lives below thought and steers without consultation. Left at the fountain, right past the fuel depot. His legs make these choices before his mind has even considered the alternatives. He has not walked these streets in over 30 years, and his feet have never forgotten them, which is the kind of loyalty that is also a form of haunting. Ahsoka walks half a step behind and to his left. Her mantrals sweep the crowd in a continuous passive arc, sorting data below the level of conscious attention, tracking spatial relationships, flagging anomalies, the way they always have. She says nothing. Her presence moves alongside his like a hand on a wire that might otherwise vibrate past its tolerances and snap. "Third stall from the end," he said quietly. "The one with droid parts stacked outside in crates. I see it. Don't let me go in first." She shifts forward without comment, a half-second adjustment, smooth as water finding level, and now she leads and he follows, which is the arrangement that will keep him from doing something his body has decided on before his mind has approved it. Through the open doorway of Watto's shop, visible from 20 meters, a woman kneeling beside a small boy, her hand over his on the component he's working on, guiding rather than correcting. Her voice doesn't carry at this distance. What carries is the patience in it, the shape of someone who has made attention itself into a form of shelter for a child who needs it. Anakin stops walking. Not a decision. His legs stop. Ahsoka's hand finds his arm. Not grabbing, just resting there. The pressure of it the one thing between him and whatever his body had decided to do in the next 3 seconds. He breathes. Once, twice, the market noise continues around him, carrying on the way the world carries on while people stand inside it, having moments the world doesn't slow down to register. "I've got you," she said, barely above the ambient noise. "Let me lead." He nods. Small, sufficient, Watto was at the back arguing in 3 languages simultaneously with a binary load lifter over an invoice that neither party would resolve to their satisfaction. He was exactly as remembered, blue-gray wings generating enough lift to keep him at eye level. Blunt snout arranged in the expression of a creature for whom every commercial transaction was a personal injustice he was heroically enduring. He turned at the sound of new customers and ran his eyes over Ahsoka with the automatic inventory assessment of a dealer who calculates resale value by reflex. His eyes settled longer than usual. Moved to Anakin. Something made him look a beat beyond polite. "What you want?" Blunt basic, thoroughly accented. "Parts, I got. Credits only. Real money, not Republic paper." "We're not here for parts," Ahsoka said. Her voice in a negotiation was an entirely different instrument from her voice in a fight, unhurried, carrying a quality of careful attention that made people feel studied without feeling threatened. Watto registered it the way a creature registers something standing too still in tall grass. His wings adjusted his hover. "Then what?" "The woman and the boy in your employ," Ahsoka said. "We'd like to discuss their freedom." Watto produced a dismissive sound. "Good workers. The boy especially, you don't find a head like his in salvage twice in a lifetime. Not for sale." He gestured toward the door. "Parts, we talk. Otherwise, before you decide," Ahsoka said, "I'd like to show you something." She produced a credit reader from her robe and transferred a figure. Set the reader on the workbench between them. Watto's eyes dropped to the display. His wings went still. The figure represented resources provisioned before they'd reached Mos Espa. The Guardians of the Wills maintained operational accounts across a dozen systems, and this mission had been funded accordingly. The number on that reader was enough to retire Watto's debts, relocate to a better district, and still carry operating capital into the following year. Watto looked at the number for 3 full seconds. Then he looked at Ahsoka. Toydarians were resistant to Force suggestion. This was simply a fact about the species, biological and categorical, as established as the twin suns overhead. What Qui-Gon could not do with a wave of his hand, Ahsoka had no intention of attempting with one. What she and Anakin did instead was nothing as crude as a push. They let the Force settle into the room the way warmth settles into cold stone, present, not forcing, simply amplifying what already existed. Watto's greed was real and large and required no manufacture. They gave it room and they gave it a number, and they stood back and let it make its own decision. The Force, it turned out, is most efficient when it works alongside existing human nature rather than against it. Papers, Watto said. Slower than usual, but his own voice, his own conclusion. Freedom papers. I can draw these up. Today, Ahsoka said. Today, he agreed, and reached under the counter for a data pad with the slightly puzzled satisfaction of a man who has talked himself into something excellent and can't entirely account for the conversation that got him there. They settled the account for a T-14 hyperdrive generator at the same time. Qui-Gon's ship needed one. They'd confirmed that during the approach from orbit. And the Guardians of the Whills kept better provisioned ledgers than one Jedi Master, with a handful of questionable credits. Watto stamped the receipt for both transactions with the contentment of a man who has had an unexpectedly profitable morning and is revising his earlier opinion of the day upward. Shmi Skywalker came to the front of the shop when she heard the register activity. She stood in the interior doorway with her hands quiet at her sides and watched the transaction complete with the attention of a woman who has survived by tracking every shift in her circumstances. Because her circumstances had never offered the luxury of inattention. She was not passive. She was not waiting to be informed. She was reading the room the way someone reads a room when they have spent years inside other people's power structures. Total, quiet, continuous. When Watto retreated to the back wearing the expression of a man very pleased with himself, she looked at them both. Who are you? Direct, unhurried, no performance of comfort she hadn't earned. You mentioned an older order, Guardians of the Whills, Ahsoka said. An order older than the Jedi Temple. We travel where the Force directs. Shmi considered this the way she considered everything, without rushing toward a conclusion, without needing to appear comfortable with uncertainty while she processed it. And it directed you here. Specifically, yes, Anakin said. He had kept quiet through the transaction. His voice came out lower than intended, and he adjusted, keeping his face composed, keeping his eyes from doing what they wanted to do, memorize everything, methodically and desperately the way someone memorizes a room they know they are leaving. Shmi looked at him for a moment longer than she'd looked at Ahsoka. You have kind eyes, she said, for someone working very hard not to show what's in them. He had nothing to say to that. The boy appeared at her elbow. He had cleaned most of the grease from his hands and was looking up at Anakin with the frank, uncomplicated curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to disguise his interest in strangers. His eyes moved across Anakin with the systematic scan of a born engineer encountering a mechanism he needs to understand. Are you Jedi? He asked. Something like that, Anakin said. The boy thought about this with the seriousness 9 years old brings to questions that feel important. My mom says the Jedi are peacekeepers, that they stand between people and things that want to hurt them. Anakin looked at this face, his own face, 40 years removed, carrying nothing yet, unmarked by anything the universe had planned for it, and something in his chest turned over with a weight no amount of preparation had fully accounted for. Your mom, he said carefully, is right. The boy smiled. An unguarded smile, the kind that exists before a person learns to moderate their expressions for an audience. Anakin recognized it from the inside. Shortly before dawn the following morning, while Ahsoka was out reading Mos Espa's patrol patterns, and the twin suns were still below the ridge, arguing about who would clear the horizon first, Shmi found him. She had seen the light from the street. She brought 2 cups of something hot. She sat across from him without preamble and set 1 cup on the ledge between them, and for a while they both let the sounds of the city waking around them do the talking that neither of them had decided to begin. "I've been watching you," Shmi said. "I know. The way you look at Ani." A pause that was not uncomfortable. Like you're trying to remember something you were afraid you'd forgotten. Anakin wrapped both hands around the cup, attended to the heat of it, which helped. "I don't know your real name," she said. Her voice carried no accusation in it, only the steady observation of someone making a known truth plain, rather than demanding an answer about an unknown one. "I don't think I'm meant to. But I've raised a child who fills a room the way you do, who thinks that carefully before he speaks, who holds things inside himself that are larger than any one person's chest was designed to carry." She met his eyes. "Whatever you're carrying, wherever you carried it from, you came a long distance to put it down." He looked at her. In all the years spent mourning her, after Geonosis, after the helplessness of being too late, through the decades inside a suit where grief was one more thing the machine was designed not to permit, he had never once let himself imagine what it would be like to simply sit across from her in a quiet room at dawn and have her see him. The imagining had felt like self-indulgence, which was what he had called most human things during those decades, before he understood that calling something self-indulgence was how he had learned to make it easier to lose. "You're going to be all right," he said. He made his voice steady and meant every word. "Both of you. I need you to know that." Shmi looked at him for a long count. Then she reached across the ledge and covered his hand with hers. Brief, warm, the uncomplicated touch of someone who has recognized that no explanation reaches as far as presence. "I already knew," she said. "Something shifted when you walked through that door, like a window opening in a room that had been sealed." She stood and picked up her cup and paused in the doorway. "Thank you for whatever it is you did, or are doing, or already did, I'm not certain which." A small, specific smile. "I suspect you aren't either." She left him there with the cooling cup and the coming dawn, and a grief that had somewhere along the way converted itself, molecule by molecule, into gratitude. The sandstorm came in from the dune sea like a slow verdict. It built through late morning on the western horizon, a brown wall, kilometers high, swallowing the distance between itself and Mos Espa, with the patience of something that has performed this 10,000 times and has no interest in the opinion of anyone it's headed toward. The market vendors read it the way sailors read a changing current, pulling awnings and sealing crates with practiced efficiency. The city made its accommodations. Shmi's home was small and exact. Every object had a reason. The interior carried something the rest of Mos Espa didn't, a quality of deliberate, sustained care that transformed 4 walls and a low ceiling into shelter in every sense of the word, not just the physical one. Anakin chose a position near the door without examining the choice. It faced outward. Outward was where trouble came from. Some habits persist across bodies and decades and don't require justification. Ahsoka had taken a low stool near the window, watching the storm advance with the calm of someone mapping a theater of operations. The boy sat at the work table with a half-dismantled power converter, narrating its problems to himself in a quiet, continuous murmur. Anakin did not let himself listen too closely to that voice. The door opened. They came through in a cluster, the storm already pulling at their robes, grit sharp in the air behind them. A tall man in Jedi, traveling clothes entered first. Unhurried despite the wind outside, moving with the contained ease of someone for whom a sandstorm shelter is simply the next available present moment and not an imposition. His eyes swept the room with warm, genuine interest. No threat assessment in it, just attention directed outward, because everything was apparently worth attending to. Behind him, a girl in handmaiden's robes, no older than 14, her face arranged in careful neutrality and her eyes missing nothing. Behind her, a Padawan. Obi-Wan Kenobi was 25 years old and had not yet grown the beard, and seeing him this young did something to Ahsoka that she chose not to examine on a timeline. She kept her hands still and her expression arranged. But she saw him, the Padawan braid, the open face, the quality of earnest attention he would carry through every stage of his life like load-bearing architecture, and something in her turned over very quietly, like a page. She filed it away and kept her hands still. Qui-Gon's eyes moved across the room and settled on Anakin and Ahsoka with calm, unhurried interest. Not suspicious. Interested, reading the surface the way he always reads surfaces, as something to pass through rather than stop at. "Forgive the intrusion," he said. His voice was warm and entirely without urgency. "Your neighbor directed us. I hope we've not imposed." "You haven't," Shmi said, and moved toward the stove. The room rearranged itself. The boy looked up from the power converter with the immediacy of a child who has located something more interesting than his current project, which placed him looking at Qui-Gon with the focused attention of a born engineer encountering a complicated new mechanism. Qui-Gon sat near the worktable and looked back at the boy with equal interest. Whatever he was reading in the living force, the expression that settled on his face was not surprise. It was the expression of a man following a current that has brought him exactly where he expected to arrive and is now simply present with the arrival. Anakin watched this from across the room. He watched the man who had found him, who had argued for him before a council that wasn't interested in arguments, who had died on a reactor core floor with the Chosen One prophecy still half a guess. He watched this man look at his younger self with the attentiveness of someone following a living force current, and he kept his hands relaxed on his knees. They trembled faintly, just where the angle of the room hid them from view. Qui-Gon looked up. He found Anakin's eyes. "Guardians of the Wills," he said. "Not a greeting, an observation, placed without agenda. I've encountered a few references to the Order, nothing recent. A pause that was not a gap but a consideration. You're far from any documented location." "The Force moves people," Anakin said. Even he was mildly surprised by how even it came out. "It does," Qui-Gon agreed. Something in his gaze sharpened fractionally, not suspicion, but the recognition of something his available categories couldn't quite contain. "In my experience, the journeys it arranges rarely announce their destinations in advance." He was still looking at Anakin. The look had depth in it, the brush of awareness against awareness, gentle and precise. The way Qui-Gon Jinn's attention always moved through surfaces to what lived underneath them. "You were about to say something," Qui-Gon said, gently, without urgency. "I was going to say the Force doesn't explain its geography," Anakin said. "We follow it." "No," Qui-Gon agreed, after a moment. "I don't suppose it does." And he moved on, not because he'd dropped the thread, Anakin knew, but because Qui-Gon Jinn had always known the difference between a door that was closed and a door that was not yet ready to open, and had never mistaken one for the other. Across the room, Ahsoka let out a breath that barely existed. Obi-Wan had drifted toward Ahsoka with the slightly indirect approach of a young man who finds someone interesting and hasn't decided how to announce it. "You carry 2 blades," he said. "A factual opening." "I do," she said. "The form is uncommon." "Most things worth knowing are," she said. He considered this with the seriousness of a Padawan who has not yet learned to deflect a good line. "Did you train at the temple?" "No temple," Ahsoka said. "Different teachers. Different methods." She looked at him, giving him the quality of attention she reserved for things that moved her, paired with the discipline not to let them move her visibly. "You ask good questions." "My master says I ask too many," Obi-Wan said. "Your master," she said, "is not wrong." He blinked. Then, briefly and without intending to, he smiled, young and unguarded, there and gone before he could retrieve it. Ahsoka committed it to memory and kept her face arranged. "Have you fought many Sith?" he asked. The question was direct, and without artifice, the way young Obi-Wan asked everything. She had forgotten this about him. The quality of his attention before years of war and loss taught him to hold pieces of himself back, before the armor grew. "Enough," she said. "And are they as dangerous as the texts say?" "The texts understate it," she said. "The texts were written by people who survived the encounters. The texts don't include the perspective of everyone else." He processed this with the seriousness of a Padawan who treats every piece of information as data worth storing. "You say that like someone who has learned it personally." "I say most things like someone who has learned them personally," she said. He looked at her again, a longer look, the kind that Obi-Wan Kenobi would spend his entire life giving to things he found worth examining. "You carry your experience differently from the Jedi Masters, I know. There's no," he searched for the word, "no distance in it." "Distance is a habit," Ahsoka said. "It starts as protection and ends as a wall." She held his gaze without making it a challenge. "The best teachers I ever had were fully present for everything that happened to them. They didn't stand back from their own lives and call it wisdom." Obi-Wan was quiet for a long moment. Whatever he was doing with that information, he was doing it carefully and completely. She recognized it, the way he always took in something that shifted his model and held it with full seriousness, rather than immediate conclusion. It was one of the finest things about him. It had always been one of the finest things about him. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Just remember it." The handmaiden had positioned herself near the window, watching the storm seal the last strip of visible sky. Anakin let his eyes rest on her profile, the intelligence moving behind a face kept deliberately still, the posture of someone who has spent years performing a role with such precision that the performance and the person beneath it have learned to coexist without friction. 14 years old. Governing a planet. Managing a crisis no one had planned for her. He looked away first. The boy had abandoned the power converter and was telling Qui-Gon something about the Bunta Eve race, with the concentrated intensity of a child who has identified a genuinely interested adult and intends to make full use of the opportunity. The storm pressed in, the lamp's amber light steadied against the dark outside. Anakin sat near the door and kept his face toward it, and outside and away. The storm was working through its final hours when Qui-Gon found him. Not by accident. Qui-Gon Jinn did not find people by accident. He moved through the world following currents, and if a current led him to the corner of a small house where a man was sitting in the dark watching a door, then that was where he needed to be, and he sat accordingly. Neither of them spoke for a while. The storm pressed at the walls. The lamp held its light. The house was quiet in the way houses go quiet, when everyone who can be asleep is asleep. In 30 years of following the living force, Qui-Gon said, "Finally, I have felt two things I could not place into any category I was given." Anakin waited. The first was the moment I took Obi-Wan as my apprentice. He was quiet for one beat. The second was the moment you walked into this room tonight. "I'm not sure what that means," Anakin said. "Not entirely true, but the safest true thing available." "I'm not either," Qui-Gon said, with the equanimity of a man who stopped requiring the universe to explain itself a long time ago. "What I know is that the Force doesn't generally send people from great distances to a specific planet and a specific house without intention. And I know that whatever shaped you, whatever event produced the person I'm looking at, was enormous. And old. And at some point I believe it nearly destroyed you." Anakin said nothing. "I'm not asking," Qui-Gon said. "I know what asking looks like." "This isn't that." A gust shifted the window's seal and the lamplight wavered. "There is something I've believed for a long time," Qui-Gon said, "that I was never able to put into practice with my own students. for reasons that were partly my failure and partly the fault of the institution I served. I believe the Force does not ask us to become less than human in order to serve it. That attachment is not the enemy of peace. That the love a person carries is not a liability to be managed. He looked at Anakin, direct, clear, the specific attention of someone saying something they have meant for years. I don't know where you came from. I don't know what it costs to become what you are. But I want to say something to you plainly, whatever the account looked like at its worst. The Force considers it settled. You are here because you are whole. Because whole people were needed. The room held very still. Anakin stared at the door. He had constructed, over the course of months inside a suit in the dark, an image of what it might feel like to hear something like this from this man. He had built it carefully, as a kind of sustained punishment. The way a person probes a wound to confirm it still hurts. He had not constructed it accurately. The actual thing was larger and quieter and heavier than the image, and it sat in his chest without asking permission. In another life, he said, slowly, testing each word's weight before committing it, a man I trusted very much told me that potential without wisdom was just momentum, and that the responsibility of power was to give rather than to keep. He paused. He said it once. I wasn't listening well enough. Qui-Gon was completely still. I think about it every day, Anakin said. Whoever he was, Qui-Gon said, after a long moment, he wasn't wrong. No, Anakin agreed. He wasn't. The storm shifted. The amber light steadied. From somewhere in the house, the small sound of the boy resettling in sleep, finding some new dream to fill the hours before dawn. Qui-Gon rose. At the doorway he paused, as he always paused, as though thresholds required one additional thought before crossing. The boy, he said. Yes, Anakin said. He'll be given room this time. Yes, Anakin said. He will. Qui-Gon looked at him 3 more seconds, not judging, assessing, which was different, and walked back into the dark, and Anakin sat alone for a long time after that, breathing cleared air, letting the weight of it become something he might eventually be able to carry without effort. The boy caught him alone the next morning. Ahsoka was reviewing patrol rhythms, and the twin sons were still deciding who cleared the ridge first, and Anakin had taken the low step outside the door to run a maintenance check on his lightsaber when he heard footsteps he recognized below the level of memory. Can I see it? He looked up. Young Anakin stood 2 meters away with the patient determination of a child who has already decided he will ask until the answer changes. His eyes were fixed on the saber hilt with the attention of a born engineer facing a mechanism he needs to understand at a physical level. He should have said no. He held the hilt out flat on both palms. Don't ignite it, he said. Hold it level. The boy stepped forward and took the hilt in both hands with the careful, instinctive respect of someone who understands the thing he holds is an extension of its owner's intent. His grip was immediately, unsettlingly correct. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the boy went completely still. Not the stillness of concentration, something else. The stillness of a person pulled briefly out of the present by something arriving from a direction the present doesn't contain. His eyes went unfocused. His hands tightened on the hilt without igniting it. His breathing changed. Anakin watched him. After 5 seconds, maybe 6, the boy blinked. He looked down at the hilt. He looked up. I saw something, he said. What did you see? He thought about it with the seriousness of someone trying to describe a dream before it dissolves entirely. Fire, he said. Stars going dark. Something breathing, mechanical, like a evaporator but slower. Deeper, he turned the hilt carefully. It felt like my future. Anakin looked at him for a long count. It isn't, he said. The boy ran this against some internal model. Because you changed it? Because we're going to. He said it quietly, as a fact. Between now and when it would have been, a great deal changes. The boy looked at him for one more moment, with eyes that held nothing but complete and open attention, the way children look at things before the world teaches them to look sideways at everything. Then he handed the hilt back, accepted the information with the gravity of someone storing something above their current processing capacity but worth retaining. "Okay," he said, and turned and walked back inside, and Anakin sat on the step with the saber in both hands and breathed, and the hard blue post-storm sky held above him, and the desert waited in every direction with its usual patience. The desert road out of Mos Espa ran flat and exposed between dunes. The post-storm air scoured clean of every particle of moisture. The sky was a hard, bright blue that felt less like atmosphere and more like the inside of something sealed. The storm had ironed the sand smooth. No tracks, no shadows yet. The twin suns were climbing toward midday, and the heat pressed down from above and radiated up from the ground in equal measure, a siege from both directions. Qui-Gon walked at the front. The handmaiden moved beside Shmi with a quiet word here and there, maintaining her cover without effort. Obi-Wan held 2 steps behind his master. Young Anakin walked close to his mother with the particular energy of a child working very hard to appear calm about everything. Anakin and Ahsoka took the rear. This was not discussed. It was simply where they needed to be. Ahsoka registered it before anything else did. Not a sound, not a visual, a shift in the Force's texture, something moving through it the way a blade moves through water. Displacing as little as possible, optimized for arrival without announcement. Something controlled and wrong and coming fast. Her hands went to her hilts. She did not ignite them yet. 200 meters, she said. Low, East Ridge. "I know," Anakin said. His hand had already found his hilt. "Coming in hard." "I know that too." What came over that ridge was a Sith speeder at full throttle, a single-occupant pursuit craft, its repulsor lift screaming as it crested the dune on a trajectory that had already selected its target and was simply closing the remaining distance. The dust it threw behind it hung in the still air like a declaration. Qui-Gon turned at the sound. His hand moved toward his hilt. Anakin and Ahsoka were already between him and the ridge. The speeder hit the flat sand, and its rider came off it in a single fluid uncoiling, feet meeting the ground, both hands already at the saber staff that ignited in one snap, twin crimson blades throwing his tattooed face into sharp relief against the hard blue sky. Darth Maul landed 6 meters away, and the force around him sharpened into something predatory and enormous. He looked at the 2 people between him and his target. He did not attack. It was not a choice. Some layer of training beneath his conscious mind had registered 2 force presences of a magnitude he had no reference for, and the registration fired something involuntary in his body. A flinch, deep and physical, that his mind was still in the process of overriding when both of them ignited. He had it under control in under a second. But that second happened, and he was aware it had happened, and the awareness sat in him like a foreign object. Ahsoka's white blades caught the desert light and scattered it into something that had no name in the color vocabulary the sky owned. Anakin's blue blade followed half a second later, held low in a ready stance so completely relaxed it could only belong to someone who had stopped being afraid of what stood in front of him a very long time ago. Not a performance of calm. The thing itself. Maul's eyes moved between them, running calculations. "Move," he said, flat and controlled, the voice of someone managing an unexpected variable. Neither of them moved. He came in fast, and without announcement, the saber staff rotating, a technique engineered to split a defender's attention across 2 vectors simultaneously, generating coverage problems most opponents couldn't solve in the time available. Against a single fighter, it was devastating. Against paired fighters who operated as separate individuals sharing a space, it was still devastating. Against 2 fighters who were not operating separately, who had fought beside each other for years, whose timing was calibrated at a level below conscious instruction, it had a fundamental problem. They didn't take turns. Every fighter Maul had ever faced, every Jedi, every ranked defensive pair, every double team in the field, had engaged as two individuals sharing a stage. Two soloists, each waiting for the other to create space. What he was encountering now had no seam he could locate. No moment where one of them was waiting for the other and could be pressured through that gap. Ahsoka took his first rotation. Her crossed white blades met both ends of the staff at the arc's junction and redirected, rather than opposed. Borrowed his momentum, stepped inside it, forced him to abort the rotation before it completed, rather than fighting its force. Anakin was already moving to the exposed right flank, occupying rather than striking, cutting off the escape vector, and Maul spun to cover the threat, and found Ahsoka repositioned on the opposite side, and the geometry of the engagement had become something he had no trained response for. He was fast. Genuinely, lethally fast. 3 separate exchanges in the first minute saw Ahsoka block attacks that would have ended fighters with her experience, but not her speed. Once the saberstaff's end came within a handspan of Anakin's face and produced no reaction, no flinch, no interruption in the forward press. That unnerved Maul more than the block. A fighter who doesn't flinch at a near miss has either failed to register it or has completed their reckoning with the available outcomes. Neither interpretation suggested someone who could be rattled into a gap. He drove hard at Ahsoka's left flank, using her pivot to try to open space between her and Anakin, converting 2 bodies into 2 soloists by forcing reactive movement that separated them. Anakin didn't follow her. He was already in the position Maul needed before Maul's step had completed, and the angle collapsed, and for 1 fractional second Maul was between them with no clean vector anywhere. He escaped. He was precise enough to escape, but it cost him 2 backward steps and a defensive rotation that was purely reactive, not the response of a fighter who controlled his engagement, and in the years he had trained, Darth Maul had never taken 2 backward steps. Anakin's blade came to his throat from the front. Ahsoka's came to his spine from behind. Maul went still. Controlled breathing. Composed face. Eyes running calculations that returned empty. The saber-staff was still in his hands. He could not use it in the interval between decision and consequence. "Drop it," Anakin said. A long beat. The saber-staff hit the sand. Qui-Gon had not moved throughout. He stood 5 meters back with one hand near his hilt, and the expression of a man whose framework for understanding what he has witnessed is returning one result: insufficient data. Obi-Wan stood beside his master with his mouth not quite closed. "He's evidence," Ahsoka said, producing restraints from her belt. "Alive is useful. The other option isn't." She secured Maul with the economy of someone who has restrained Force users before, under conditions far less controlled, and considers this a routine entry on a list of established capabilities. Maul submitted with the composure of a weapon that has been secured and is waiting for conditions to change, the most dangerous kind of submission there is. Both of them knew it and accounted for it. Qui-Gon walked forward and stopped beside Anakin and looked down at the bound Zabrak and then looked at Anakin, and the look had the weight of a question selecting itself. "He answered to someone," Qui-Gon said. "Certain, yes," Anakin said. "We know who. And we have what we need to prove it." From behind, the boy's voice carried on the desert air. "Did you see that? How did they?" And Shmi's hand on his shoulder, and Obi-Wan clearing his throat quietly, and the twin suns burning overhead as if nothing of consequence had happened in their light. The journey to Coruscant was long enough for the weight of Tatooine to settle fully into whatever compartment they'd assigned it. They traveled aboard Qui-Gon's ship, repaired, fueled, provisioned with the hyperdrive unit acquired that same morning. Maul occupied a secured compartment at the rear, Force cuffed and silent, a silence no one trusted. Young Anakin spent most of the journey at the cockpit viewport, watching hyperspace with the complete absorption of someone seeing something for the first time that they already understand at a level that exceeds explanation. His mother sat nearby and let him look. Ahsoka found Anakin at the common area viewport, late in the first rotation, when the hyperlane stretched blue and uninterrupted outside the transparisteel. "Qui-Gon knows something," she said. "He knows a great deal of things," Anakin said. "He always has. He was better at this than anyone gave him credit for. He knows something about you specifically." He didn't press. "No," Anakin said. "He wouldn't. A moment." Hyperspace moved outside. "Are you all right?" she asked. He thought about it. The question deserved that. "I'm not sure what all right looks like from here," he said finally. "But I'm here. That's more than I expected to be. That's enough," she said, and meant it entirely. Coruscant from above looked exactly as it had always looked, a lie told in light. The transport dropped through the cloud layer, and the city resolved below them, eternal and enormous, its billions of illuminated windows creating a false sky from a planet's surface. The Jedi Temple's 5 spires rose from the center with the quiet certainty of a structure that has stood for 10,000 years and expects to stand for 10,000 more. Anakin watched it through the viewport and said nothing. He had spent a lifetime inside that building. He knew what its landing platform felt like at first light, and what the archives smelled like before the day's researchers arrived. He knew the council chamber's silence when it was empty. He knew all of it in his bones, and none of it was comfort, and he walked into it anyway because the alternative had already happened and was the reason he was here. The council chamber occupied the peak of the central spire. 12 seats in a circle. Sunlight through tall windows laid across the stone floor in long bars of gold that warmed the surface without warming the room. It was exactly as he had always known it, the proportions, the silence, the arrangement of chairs that ensured whoever stood in the center was surrounded from every direction and could not position themselves toward a single authority. He had stood in this circle before. He knew what it was designed to produce. He stood in it now and felt none of it. Yoda's eyes found him before the session formally opened. Not social, involuntary, the way a compass moves. The old master's awareness reached towards something that had registered as seismic, and located its source before the conscious mind had finished the question. His ears had risen slightly. He said nothing immediately, which meant he was processing something that had outpaced his usual processing speed. Mace Windu was looking at Ahsoka with the focused, unblinking attention of someone running an assessment and finding that none of his standard tools were returning clean data. His hands rested on his chair arms with a stillness that was the opposite of ease. All 12 present. All 12 attending. "Your names," Mace said. "No preamble." "Ronin," Anakin said. "Fulcrum," Ahsoka said. "Guardians of the Wills." Mace's tone indicated he had reviewed the temple archives and found them unhelpfully sparse. An order with no fixed location. No identifiable hierarchy. Nothing current in any archive within living memory. A controlled pause. And yet here you stand, having subdued a Sith apprentice this council had no record of, using combat techniques that don't correspond to any catalogued form. "That concerns you," Ahsoka said. "Everything about this concerns me," Mace replied. "Felt it." Yoda's voice arrived quietly from his chair. "Upon your arrival." An echo, not of something approaching, of something already resolved. His eyes moved between them with the attentiveness of something very old reading a very deep current. "Known to the Force, you are, both of you, deeply known." How this is possible? He stopped. Let the unfinished sentence stand as its own statement. "The Order operates outside the Temple's direct awareness by structure," Anakin said. "That's design, not evasion. The design of your Order," Mace said, "does not account for what this room has been feeling since you walked into this building." Ki Adimundi, forward in his chair, the Sith. "How did you know where to be?" "We follow the Force," Ahsoka said. "It brought us to Tatooine. The rest unfolded. That isn't an answer. It's the most accurate one we have, she said. Plainly, without apology. Mace shifted. The boy. The chamber's temperature changed without changing. Anakin Skywalker, Mace continued. Shmi Skywalker's child. Midi-chlorian count unprecedented in all recorded measurement. Qui-Gon's position is already on record. His gaze moved to Anakin with the weight of deployed neutrality. You appear to share it. We believe the Council's concern has merit, Anakin said. And the proposed solution doesn't. A brief silence arrived. Then, explain that. The concern is legitimate, Anakin said. A person of his potential, without training, without the framework to understand and direct what he carries, the risk is real. I'm not here to argue it away. He paused. The proposed solution is to remove him from everything he knows and place him inside a system that will require him to amputate every natural attachment before he's old enough to understand what he's giving up. And then, call that protection. Mace's expression did not move. It has been the Order's method for 1,000 years, Anakin said. I know. I also know what the method produces when it fails. The room went very quiet. A child raised without family, Anakin said. Without a single relationship the Order acknowledges as legitimate, without permission to love anyone, that child doesn't learn to release attachment. He learns to hide it. And hidden attachment, in a person of extraordinary power and insufficient support, doesn't diminish over time. He paused one beat. It accumulates in the dark. Until the accumulation has mass. No one filled the silence. Ahsoka spoke, and her voice carried the deliberateness of someone building something that needs to hold weight. The code doesn't fail because its values are wrong, she said. It fails when it mistakes control for care, when it produces a weapon before it produces a person, and then is surprised when the weapon, under sufficient pressure, behaves like a weapon. She held Mace's gaze. We are asking for one boy to remain with his mother. We are asking for Qui-Gon to mentor him with presence and patience, outside formal induction, until the Council determines further steps. That is the entirety of our ask. One child. One adjustment. Mace looked at Yoda. Yoda had his eyes closed. He stayed that way long enough that the room began to feel the duration as a specific kind of communication. When he opened his eyes, they went to the center of the circle and held there, held on Anakin, specifically with the attentiveness of something ancient recognizing something it has been looking for. Suffered long you have, Yoda said, softly, both of you. Carried something enormous. Come through it. A pause. Earned the right to speak on what breaks and what holds, perhaps you have. Mace let out one measured breath. The boy remains with his mother. Not inducted, not now, not until the Council reviews further. Qui-Gon mentors him informally, outside formal apprenticeship, under observation. Structure without extraction. He looked at Anakin with the expression of a man who has offered something he hasn't fully reconciled himself to offering. This is caution, not agreement. The distinction matters. Understood, Anakin said. Thank you. Mace did not acknowledge the thanks. He looked at his hands briefly, then looked up. The Sith in custody will require extensive examination. We know, Ahsoka said. And you'll cooperate with what we can, she said. Yes, the gold light held the chamber. Outside the tall windows, Coruscant moved through its day, vast and indifferent and entirely unaware that something in the room at the top of the central spire had just quietly rearranged what was possible. The Senate district wore its grandeur like a declaration. Wide boulevards, polished stone that doubled the light, statues of senators and chancellors who had spent their careers shaping the Republic into precisely what Palpatine needed it to be. Buildings tall and certain of themselves in the way buildings become certain when enormous wealth has been spent ensuring they project permanence. Anakin walked through it and watched the architecture and thought about how thoroughly a man can hide inside an institution he has spent decades building as a hiding place. He'll have sensed something from Tatooine, Ahsoka said beside him. I know, he won't have placed it yet. But he'll be refining his model. I know that too. So, he'll be composed, she said. Watch for how much effort that takes. The effort is the tell. The completely composed one never is. Palpatine's senatorial offices occupied a corner suite accessible enough to project the image of a servant of the people, positioned with enough elevation to signal, to anyone paying attention, that the man who used it had very specific ideas about which direction service actually flowed. The anteroom was warm and tastefully arranged. A protocol droid managed appointments with the seamless efficiency Palpatine's entire public operation was selected to project. They did not have an appointment. The droid began its explanation. Anakin looked at it. The droid revised its assessment and showed them through. The office was a production. Art, light quality. Furniture arranged to suggest equals in conversation, rather than the power differential the space actually encoded. The desk positioned so that whoever sat behind it was partially backlit, their expression harder to read than the visitors. Palpatine was standing at the window when they entered, not seated. This, too, was deliberate. The man coming forward, informal, collegial, projecting warmth without the desk's formality to mediate it. A greeting calibrated to make the visitor feel they were being granted something personal. And beside him, face to the glass, the boy. Qui-Gon had arranged a Senate tour, a standard kindness offered to remarkable children new to the capital, a way of letting them understand the republic they might one day serve. The boy was here legitimately, looking at the city spread below with the genuine wonder of someone seeing something for the first time they already understand they will spend the rest of their life inside. Palpatine's hand rested on his shoulder. Anakin's body processed this before his mind had finished the observation. Something went absolutely still inside him, not the trained composure of the council chamber, but the stillness of a temperature crossing zero, a state change, everything going cold and clear and absolute. He crossed the room in 8 steps. Not running. Not reaching for his blade. Walking at a pace measured, and even that covered the distance between the door and the boy, in the time it took Palpatine to register their entry, arrange his expression into welcome, and understand that the welcome was not what this visit required. He stepped between Palpatine and the boy. Unhurried, not aggressive. Simply a door closing in a wall that had been found. A body occupying the position between a hand and what the hand rested on. The boy was behind Anakin's back, and the hand had nowhere left to be. Palpatine's welcome expression completed itself regardless. Warmth, open hands. The face of a man delighted by unexpected company. It was a masterwork. Decades of construction cost him nothing to deploy. How extraordinary, he said. I don't believe we've been introduced. Ronan, Anakin said. Guardians of the Wills. Palpatine's eyes moved to Ahsoka, returned to Anakin. Reading, filing, behind the warmth, something had gone very quiet and very precise. An ancient tradition. The Force and its older interpreters. A slight incline of the head, precisely the correct degree of deference. What brings you to my offices? The boy, Ahsoka said. She had taken a position to Anakin's left, angled slightly toward the exit. Every word placed with care. We're here for the boy. Palpatine's expression produced exactly the right configuration of gentle confusion. I was simply offering young Anakin a look at the Senate. A small kindness for a remarkable child who has come a very long distance from very little. He spread his hands. Open, generous. Surely there's nothing to concern yourself with. Anakin looked at him. This was the thing about Palpatine that no amount of foreknowledge fully prepared you for. The intelligence behind the performance was so precisely managed, so completely buried beneath warmth and sincerity that looking directly at him felt like looking at a mirror rather than a window. The man did not leak. He had spent a millennium of accumulated Sith refinement distilled through one extraordinary mind, and the result was something that had learned to resemble nothing dangerous. Anakin reached into the Force. Not a push, not an intrusion, simply presence, his own, full and unobstructed, the accumulated Vader decades stripped away to reveal what had been underneath all along, which was something the dark side had spent 30 years trying to extinguish and failed. He let it extend toward Palpatine the way you extend a hand in unfamiliar dark, not to take anything, simply to register what occupies the space. He felt Palpatine reach back. A touch so practiced it was almost texture rather than action, featherlight, expert. The technique of a master who has tested thousands of minds without their awareness. It moved toward the surface of Anakin's consciousness, looking for purchase, for ambition, for fear, for the places where grief and hunger and unfinished wanting had carved grooves deep enough for a suggestion to find its footing. It found nothing. Not resistance. Resistance implied a wall, and a wall implied something worth hiding behind it. What the probe encountered was a person who had already lived through everything Palpatine's technique existed to promise, had chosen differently at the very end of all of it, and was standing in this room with no remaining leverage point and nothing left to lose. The probe withdrew, by less than a second. But Palpatine's hands, open and relaxed at his sides, settled against each other behind his back with a deliberateness that was one fraction of a beat too deliberate to be unconscious. Ahsoka spoke. Quiet, measured, each word placed rather than thrown. "Exegol," she said. Palpatine did not move. A throne built on a dead moon above a fleet assembled across generations below sensor range, she continued. An order given in numbers, 66 of them, encoding the architecture of a republic's collapse inside a standing military command. She tilted her head fractionally. Poetry to anyone who doesn't know the translation. We know it. The warmth in Palpatine's expression did not collapse. It was structural, load-bearing, the thing the entire edifice was built upon, and it could not collapse because it could not afford to. But beneath it, in whatever space he kept the truth of himself, something went absolutely and completely still. The stillness of a very large thing that has been located by something it cannot immediately quantify. His jaw tightened, once, by a fraction visible only to someone who knew where to look. "Take the boy outside," Anakin said over his shoulder, not turning. Ahsoka moved. Young Anakin went with her. He glanced back once, the child's instinct that something important is happening in the room being vacated, and then the door closed and it was just the two of them, and the tall window, and the city of Coruscant blazing indifferently behind it. Palpatine looked at Anakin. "Remarkable," he said softly. "The warmth still there, because it would always be there. You are very remarkable people." "This conversation," Anakin said, "isn't finished." "No," Palpatine agreed. "Pleasantly, I don't believe it is." He moved to his desk with unhurried steps and took his seat and lifted a data pad from its surface and began reading it. By every visible measure, the encounter was already behind him, already converted into intelligence, already becoming the foundation of contingency and counter-response. The door closed. In the corridor, Anakin stood with his hand against the wall and breathed, and let the cold certainty of what they had just accomplished settle into his bones like ballast. The account was opening. Naboo from altitude was everything Coruscant pretended to be. Green, extravagantly, unapologetically green, forests that had never been cleared for development, rivers that ran where they chose rather than where infrastructure required them, a sky that permitted actual weather. Oto Gunga sat beneath its lake like scattered luminous pearls. Theed rose above its falls on the cliff face, curved stone and copper domes and the architectural confidence of a civilization that has never felt the need to apologize for beauty. Below it, The Trade Federation's occupation sat on all of this like a bruise. Tanks on the Theed boulevards. Droid patrols moving in the interlocking grid that a human commander would never choose, and a droid commander always defaulted to. Efficient. Predictable. A lock that opens from the outside if you know the pattern. B-1 battle droids at every checkpoint. Their photoreceptors sweeping in programmed arcs, incapable of the one quality that makes any sentry worth stationing: genuine suspicion. Anakin mapped the entire deployment in the time it took most people to find a comfortable position on the ridge. The droid control ship in orbit runs everything, Ahsoka said, crouched beside him. Cut that signal and every unit on the ground drops simultaneously. Gunray won't be on the control ship. No, he'll want to be here when they bring her in. He likes the performance of it. She was quiet a moment. He'll be in the throne room. Then we split it, Anakin said. You take the control ship. I take the throne room. She looked at him. The control ship is in orbit. You've operated in worse. With a full squad, she said. Not alone. You won't be alone. He nodded toward the Naboo fighter bay below, where N-1 starfighters sat in their lines and pilots were already moving toward them with the posture of people who have been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. Give them something to follow. They'll follow it. You know how to lead an attack run. 2 seconds of quiet. Gunray doesn't get hurt. Gunray gets everything he deserves, Anakin said. Which is a Republic prison cell and a very long public trial. Boss Nass received them in the Gungan sacred place, a forest clearing where ancient stone figures rose from the grass, and the air carried the scent of something old and alive. He was enormous and skeptical, in the manner of a leader who has kept his people secure for a long time, by being very precise about when outsiders were useful and when they were a different kind of problem. Ahsoka addressed him as one military commander addressing another, which was what he was. He registered the shift from the diplomatic posture he usually received from non-Gungans with the alertness of someone who has been waiting a long time to be read correctly. The Naboo city has a problem, she said. We have a solution. We need your forces as the hammer while we serve as the blade. Nass studied Anakin, then returned to Ahsoka. Yusa not Jedi. No, she said. Older, he considered this with the gravity of a leader who has learned over decades that the most important thing about a stranger is not what they claim to be, but whether they mean what they say. He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. Once, enormous, final. Wesa got a grand army, he said. Wesa ready to use it. The Eastern Droid Patrol never registered the Gungan advance. They came through the tree line in the pre-dawn dark. Cavalry moving at a speed the Trade Federation's tactical modeling had never anticipated, because the modeling was built on engagement records decades outdated. The eastern grid collapsed in 4 minutes. The northern checkpoint held 7 before the second column closed, and the defensive geometry became insoluble. In orbit, Ahsoka came in through the control ship's fighter bay during the full engagement of the N-1 attack run, the Naboo pilots flying with the furious precision of people defending their home, keeping the ship's defense systems occupied with genuine threats, while she used the distraction with the economy of someone who considers a lightsaber a specialized tool and her own body sufficient for problems below that ceiling. She moved through the ship's corridors with the efficiency of someone who had memorized the layout of every Trade Federation command vessel class produced in the last 30 years. Because 3 decades of fighting the successors of this technology required exactly that kind of database. The reactor room had 6 B-1 units. She walked through them in 7 seconds. Hands and feet and kinetic force application with the surgical precision of someone who leaves lightsaber ignition for situations genuinely requiring it. The droids went down without drama, which was how she preferred every engagement she could manage. She reached the central processing core. Her hands moved across the interface with the focused speed of a mind that thinks in systems and has spent decades learning to think faster than the systems it operates against. "Hello there," she said to the terminal, and smiled at nothing in particular, and began to work. Anakin came through the servant's entrance. The Trade Federation's deployment had categorized it as low priority. Servants were not a tactical variable in standard droid doctrine, which was the kind of assumption that rested on servants being exactly what they appeared to be. He was through the corridor and at the throne room doors before the nearest patrol completed its arc, and the door mechanism took approximately as long to address as knocking and waiting would have. Newt Gunray sat in the throne with the posture of a man performing authority, in a space built for someone else's authority, which gave his performance a quality of thin desperation he seemed unaware of. Two droidekas flanked him, shield generators cycling up as the door's forced entry tripped their sensors. Anakin ignited his blade and assessed the room in the same moment. Droidekas were serious opponents against most fighters, shield generators that deflected blaster fire and resisted standard lightsaber contact, with twin cannons inside the bubble. Against most opponents. The generators had a known power coupling vulnerability that sustained lightsaber contact at the right resonant frequency could trigger, a feedback loop that collapsed the shield entirely. It had taken 3 years of Clone Wars combat to identify the frequency. He knew the frequency. The first droideka's shield flared and collapsed. He was through its guard before the weapon systems finished their targeting cycle. The second he lifted with the Force and held against the far wall with enough pressure to lock the mechanical legs without destroying the machine. A choice. He wanted witnesses to what was about to follow. Gunray was on his feet. This is an outrage. The Federation will not permit. The Senate will hear of this. There are legal structures, agreements, immunity arrangements that— Sit down, Anakin said. Gunray sat. He had the particular quality of a man whose confidence is entirely structural, dependent on the scaffolding of titles and agreements, and the assumption that institutional arrangements would hold. With the scaffolding absent, what remained was a thin, frightened person with a great deal of money and no one left to spend it calling in favors from. Anakin found no satisfaction in that observation. It was simply a fact about the man, like his height, or the color of his robes. "You kept records," Anakin said. "Not a question." Gunray blinked. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the structural confidence, a flicker of something that in a more experienced criminal might have been recognition. All commercial entities are required to maintain documentation in accordance with banking clan regulation. "Yes," Anakin said. "I know. We're counting on that." In orbit, the signal cut at the same moment across every droid on Naboo's surface. Not a fade, not a glitch. A stop. Complete, simultaneous, every B1 and droideka and AT transitioning from active to offline in the interval between 1 second and the next. They stood where they stood. They stayed there. In the streets of Theed, a Gungan warrior looked at the frozen droid in front of him, then at the city of frozen droids around him, and made a sound that was not a word and was not quiet, and it spread from him outward, block by block and street by street, Gungan and Naboo alike, the sound of a city reclaiming its own ground. Padma Amidala came through the throne room doors with a blaster in her hand and her hair down, and the expression of a queen who had planned to fight her way to this room and had arrived to find the fighting finished, and was making her adjustments without letting any of them show on her face. She looked at Gunray, then at Anakin. "The control ship?" she said. "Handled," he said. She looked out the window at Theed below, at the frozen droid army in the streets, at the Gungans moving through it like a tide, at the city intact and copper-domed and green in the morning light. Her jaw set with a quality that held both anger and relief inside it, and showed neither. "I want it understood," she said quietly, "that Naboo reclaimed its own capital. The operational assistance was support, not authorship." "It was your city," Anakin said. "We cleared the path. You walked through it. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression adjusted, not softening, acknowledging a distinction that mattered. From the window, the falls below Theed caught the morning light and scattered it upward through the glass. And the throne room filled briefly with gold, and Anakin stood in it for one unguarded moment and let it be exactly what it was. The interrogation of Gunray took 3 hours. Ahsoka ran it. Patient, methodical, asking questions she already knew the answers to, and watching Gunray fill the spaces around those answers with details he didn't understand were the useful ones. Financial routing, transmission records, corporate structures. A chain of intermediary accounts threading through 4 star systems, each holding a piece of a pattern that Gunray had documented with the comprehensive, self-protective thoroughness of a man who believed records were armor. He had kept copies of everything. He had distributed those copies to 3 separate caches as insurance against precisely the outcome he was now living through. He had not considered what would happen if someone knew exactly which caches to look at. They knew. The records, extracted and compiled, traced a directive chain that ran from the blockade back through 7 intermediary structures to a single controlling account. A legal entity registered under a name that meant nothing without context and everything with it. Senator Palpatine of Naboo, the man who had promised Gunray Senate immunity and then arranged to be positioned to provide it. No voice recordings. No personal evidence beyond documentation. What they had was a financial architecture so comprehensive, in combination with the physical evidence of a Sith apprentice deployed with perfect knowledge of a Jedi transport's route, that the Senate's investigative commission, given the starting threads and the knowledge of where to pull, would construct the rest without assistance. They didn't require Maul's testimony. Records don't recant. Records don't revise under pressure. On the transport back to Coruscant, Ahsoka set the data chip on the small table between them. He'll have contingencies, she said. They were built for a different problem, Anakin said. Us, someone who already knows every move he has and isn't afraid of any of them. He met her eyes. His entire model requires leverage. Fear, the believable threat that what he offers is preferable to what he'll do otherwise. A pause. We have nothing left for him to threaten. She was quiet for a moment. He'll try to turn you, she said. Not an accusation, a tactical note, placed clearly before an engagement. I know. I want us both clear on it before we walk in. Ahsoka. I know you know, she said. I'm saying it anyway, because that's what I do, and because you're the person most worth saying it to. He nodded. She nodded back. The data chip sat between them, and the hyperspace tunnel burned blue outside the viewport, and the stars waited on the other side. Coruscant at night told the lie better than it did in daylight. The darkness absorbed the grime and the stratified misery of the lower levels and left only the lights, hundreds of billions of them, moving and fixed, the luminous nervous system of a civilization that had convinced itself this was what civilization meant. The landing platform air tasted of ion exhaust and atmospheric processors running at capacity. They walked. Not quickly, not slowly. The pace of 2 people who know exactly where they are going and have decided that nothing about that knowledge requires hurrying. The Senate district at this hour was quiet, daytime foot traffic replaced by night shift aids and security rotations. The bronze statues on their pedestals held the artificial light in their faces, gesturing at futures they hadn't lived to see. Neither of them spoke. The avenue leading to Palpatine's building was broader than the surrounding streets. The building faces set farther back, and the acoustic effect was a quiet that shouldn't have existed this deep inside a city that never stopped. Their footsteps on the polished stone were the loudest sound on the block. Ahsoka reached the door first. The security system ran its challenge. She looked at it with the patient attention of someone who has spent years learning to dissuade electronic systems from their defaults. And then she put 2 fingers against the panel, and the force moved through the circuitry with the authority of water finding a course. And the door opened without drama. The lobby had a reception droid that did not flag 2 people crossing with purpose because purpose was not in its flagging criteria, and purpose was the one thing they carried in absolute surplus. The lift ascended. 14 floors. Anakin counted them without intending to, each one a second of approach, the interval between decision and consequence shrinking at a fixed rate that nothing could alter. He thought about the boy. Specifically, not as a symbol or a strategic consideration, but as the actual child who had stood at a window looking at the city with genuine wonder on his face, while a hand rested on his shoulder. He held that image in front of everything he was walking toward and found it heavier than anything on the other side of the equation. The right kind of heavy, the kind that held you in place. The lift opened. Palpatine's office at night was a different room from the one they'd visited in daylight. The window that had staged so many performances now simply framed the city below. A field of lights in every direction, the Republic spread across a planet's worth of real estate, the civilization he had spent 1,000 years of accumulated Sith patience preparing to absorb. The desk lamp was on. The desk was occupied. He did not look up when they entered. "I expected you somewhat sooner," Palpatine said. He turned a page of the document he was reading with the unhurried manner of a man in complete command of his environment. The Naboo situation resolved ahead of projection. He set the document down and looked at them, and his expression was the one reserved for situations requiring maximum composure. Warm, measured. A trace of something that performed as regret. "You've brought evidence, I imagine." Ahsoka placed the data chip on the desk. He looked at it. His face did not change. "Newt Gunray's complete records," Anakin said. 3 years of communications and financial routing, threading through 7 corporate structures to a single controlling account registered under a legal entity whose beneficial owner is documented in Gunray's own compliance filings, required by banking clan regulation. Kept with the thoroughness of a man who believed documentation was protection. He held Palpatine's gaze. He was wrong about that. Something shifted behind Palpatine's eyes. Not fear, the recalibration of a sophisticated system encountering new constraints and searching the remaining operational space. "Anakin," he said. The name landed with its full intended weight. Familiar, warm, the implicit offer of a relationship between two men who understand each other in ways no institution could contain. The precise instrument for the precise vulnerability he believed existed. The desert boy who had always needed someone to claim him. "You have lived a remarkable life," Palpatine said, his voice dropping to something almost private. "The losses you've carried, the people you've loved. There are possibilities, paths the Jedi would never show you, truths about loss and permanence that they prefer to call forbidden because they have no answer to them, I know," Anakin said. Palpatine stopped. "I know every word of this," Anakin said. His voice was even and quiet and carried no heat in any direction. "I know where it ends. I've watched it end. I was present for every part of the ending." He looked at the man across the desk, the kind face, the careful warmth, the 1,000-year performance, and felt nothing that could be grabbed. Nothing with purchase. "It ends with me on a table while you watch. And nothing it promised is saved. The people I was told I was protecting were never the point. I was." The room held very still. Then Palpatine set the pretense down. Not dramatically, not with a declaration. He simply stopped, the warmth draining from his expression the way water drains when the vessel inverts, leaving what had always been underneath it. Something cold and ancient and patient, present in this room for the first time since they'd walked in. The full weight of Darth Sidious arriving in a space that had, until this moment, only ever contained Senator Palpatine. He rose from the desk. His hand moved, practiced, economical, and a single crimson blade ignited from a hilt concealed in a mount inside the desk's edge. The red light transformed the room's geometry. His silhouette against the window became something else, not a senator, not a performance, but what had been standing behind every performance he had ever given, The force in the room changed, not subtly. The pressure dropped before structural failure, the temperature shift before a collapse, something enormous and dark asserting its presence in the space between one breath and the next. The dark side arriving with its full mass, cold and genuine and very old. Anakin ignited his blade. Ahsoka ignited both of hers, red and blue and white. The window blazed behind Sidious, and the city blazed behind the window, and the last act began. Sidious came across the desk in a motion that covered 3 meters in less time than the eye tracked. Controlled aggression refined across decades of private practice, in rooms no one had ever entered. His blade drove for Anakin's center while his left hand extended toward Ahsoka, both attacks launching simultaneously with the mechanical precision of someone for whom this level of multitasking was not effort, but deeply embedded habit. Anakin took the blade, stepped into the contact rather than away from it, using the angle to check momentum without opposing its full force. Ahsoka moved off the axis of the force blast, absorbed the deflection with her positioning rather than her blades. The desk fragmented as Sidious drove through it, heavy furniture as projectile, aimed at Ahsoka's recovery position. She redirected it with a palm, and it hit the wall rather than her, the impact enormous in the enclosed space. He pressed Anakin immediately. 3 combinations, technically immaculate, each designed to produce a defensive response that conditioned the next offensive opportunity. Combat as grammar, where each clause sets up the next. Gemso met it, power against power, the form built for exactly this kind of aggressive exchange. But the answer cost Anakin ground, and he took the cost deliberately, moving with the pressure rather than against it, buying space rather than contesting position, because the point was not to beat Sidious on his terms. The point was to take his terms away. Ahsoka closed from the left. Sidious pivoted without looking. His blade intercepted her lead saber, while his right arm maintained engagement with Anakin's blade, holding both of them simultaneously, not desperately, not at his limit, but with the technical control of someone who had trained for paired opponents, because he understood they would eventually come. The dark side gave him a raw ceiling neither of them could individually match. They both knew it. It was a parameter. The fight had never been about matching his ceiling. He threw lightning, a sustained arc from his left hand, while his right maintained blade engagement, a feat of force attunement achieved by very few practitioners in recorded history, performed by Sidious with the effortless deployment of something internalized decades ago. The bolt hit Ahsoka's crossed blades and stopped there, her arms locked against the sustained current, feet sliding centimeters back across the stone floor. Every muscle held a specific task. Her breathing ran measured and deliberate and working harder than it had 30 seconds ago. She held it, not through any special property of her blades. There was nothing mystical in their color. She held it because she was one of the finest practitioners alive, and because she had spent years learning to treat force lightning as an energy current rather than a physical attack, bleeding its excess through controlled redirection rather than letting it accumulate. It was technique, hard-won and precise, and it was costing her something that could be seen in the set of her shoulders and the deliberateness of her breath. She held. Anakin drove into Sidious from behind, full commitment, no reservation, the weight of a mature fighter completely behind each blow, in a way that only belongs to someone who has stopped protecting themselves against consequences. 3 strokes. Sidious released the lightning to address the pressure, spinning, and Ahsoka moved the instant the current cut, forward, closing distance, positioning for the angle Anakin's advance had just created. Sidious read it. He always read it. That was the terrible truth of the man, the best who had ever lived at reading combat geometry 3 moves ahead. He broke left, collapsing the angle before it materialized, and reset to the room's center with both threats covered. What followed was the longest sustained exchange either of them had ever been inside, Sidious driving Anakin back toward the window until there was nowhere left, a force push of enormous mass targeting Ahsoka and sending her hard into the wall. 2 seconds of recovery that Sidious used fully, Anakin planting his feet and absorbing the next stroke through his legs and pushing back with the will of a person who has decided this is where the retreating ends. Not technique, not form. Just decision, applied through a body that has made its peace with every outcome. Sidious's forward momentum checked. By a fraction. Enough, Ahsoka was already there. Her lead blade angled for his weapon hand. Her second blade covered the counter route. Not a killing blow, a disarming arc, precise and clean. He brought his blade across to block. He caught the lead saber. He did not catch the second. Her white blade took his lightsaber at the hilt. The weapon went dark and spun across the floor. His remaining hand swung in reflex rather than technique, wild and uncontrolled, and Anakin was already inside the arc, under it, close enough to feel the displaced air, and his blade came up. Blue and white crossed at Sidious's throat. The room was very loud in the sudden silence. Sidious stood with nothing in his remaining hand, and 2 blades at his throat, and the geometry resolved against him in every direction. His breathing was elevated, the only tell, the only visible evidence that the last several minutes had required something from him. His eyes moved between them with the calculation of a system searching for remaining options and returning empty. Nothing remained. His hand opened. Ahsoka produced restraints and secured him with the economy of someone for whom this was a procedural step in a prepared sequence. Anakin kept his blade in place until the restraints clicked closed. Then he stepped back and took one long, slow breath, all the way in and all the way out, and looked at Darth Sidious standing bound in the ruins of his own office, with Coruscant blazing indifferently through the window behind him. 1,000 years. The Sith rule of 2, built across a millennium of patience and cruelty and meticulous architecture, designed to survive every threat the Republic and the Jedi Order could produce. It had no model for this, could not have. The variable it lacked was not power or knowledge or technique, though they had brought all 3. It was 2 people who had nothing left to lose fighting alongside each other. Not performed fearlessness. Not courage managed against the presence of fear. Simply its absence. 2 beings who had already lost everything fear uses as leverage, who had walked through the loss and arrived on the other side with nothing remaining to be taken. Ahsoka looked at Anakin across the wrecked office. Her blades extinguished. His followed. The ordinary dark of a room whose lights had been destroyed in the first 30 seconds of a fight settled around them. Coruscant's glow came through the window and laid itself across the floor in long bars. "It's done," she said. Not celebration, not prayer. A fact, stated plainly, in a quiet room, by 2 people who had carried the weight of it across an impossible distance and were now setting it down. The city outside blazed on in its billions of lights, unaware of what had just ended in the dark above it. Naboo recovered faster than the Republic processed paperwork. Within a week of the occupation's end, the tank tracks on Theed's boulevards had been cleared. The market stalls returned. Children came back to the streets, the truest measure of a city's recovery. Because parents don't let children into streets until they've decided those streets are safe again. And that decision always comes before any official declaration does. The Republic's legal machinery began its work. Gunray's trial was scheduled. The financial evidence moved through a dozen investigative offices simultaneously, each analyst arriving independently at the same conclusion through different threads of the same data. The blockade had never been a commercial dispute. Something older and more deliberate had been using the Trade Federation the way a hand uses a glove, and the hand belonged to a man currently in Republic custody. The arraignment of Senator Palpatine of Naboo proceeded in the Senate chamber in front of every planetary delegation. The evidence was presented. The financial trail was laid out. The connection between the Sith apprentice captured in the Tatooine desert and the communications documented in Gunray's records was articulated by a prosecutorial team working from starting threads provided by two people whose names appeared in no official record. The Senate chamber emptied that afternoon in a silence that was not shock. It was reckoning, the collective recognition that the thing they had feared was already inside the House, had been for years, and was now in custody and subject to a process. It would take years to fully correct. Systems this complex don't heal in a season. Institutional rot requires institutional will to address, and that will requires the institution to survive the revelation of its own corruption, which is never guaranteed. But the correction had begun, and beginning was the irreducible requirement. 3 weeks after Theed, a message arrived from Qui-Gon through the Temple's communication network. Routed as a routine field report to avoid the attention their names had generated, the Council had convened. The session had lasted most of a day. Yoda, he wrote, had spent much of it looking at his hands. A second message followed a week later, less formal in tone, suggesting Qui-Gon had found a quiet hour. Something has shifted in the Order's climate. I don't have a name for it yet. It isn't seismic. It's the kind of shift that happens when the pressure on a deep thing changes, when someone names the thing that's been true all along and the room sits with it instead of dismissing it. 2 of the younger masters have requested permission to maintain limited contact with family members they were told long ago to release. The Council has not yet decided. But the fact that they asked, and that the request was not immediately rejected, is new. He added, I believe that room has been waiting a long time for someone to say what you said in it, not because the Council lacked the intelligence to see it. Because the code has a gravity of its own, and it takes considerable countervailing force to demonstrate that gravity is not the same thing as rightness. He added a line at the end, the boy showed me a power converter he rebuilt from salvage. He made it run at twice the rated efficiency. His mother looks well. She's growing something in the garden. Ahsoka read it and smiled. She handed it to Anakin, who read it and said nothing for a long time, and then folded it carefully and put it away. On Tatooine, Shmi Skywalker planted a garden. The moisture farmers 2 plots over thought she had taken leave of her practical judgment. Nothing grew in Tatooine's soil without intervention that cost more than it returned. But she had obtained seeds from a supply trader who owed Watto a favor that was, given the change in her circumstances, now hers to collect. She had a salvaged irrigation line from Watto's spare parts inventory, acquired in the terms of the agreement that had freed her. She had the boy. Every morning before the twin suns cleared the eastern ridge, they worked it together. He approached the garden the way he approached everything he decided to care about. Methodically, learning its systems, diagnosing its needs, making small adjustments and observing the results with the patience of a child who understood that things worth building took time, and that time spent carefully was not time wasted. 7 small green things. Growing toward light. Qui-Gon visited twice in the first month. He sat with the boy in the evenings and answered questions about the Force the way he answered all questions, not as doctrine delivered from above, but as 2 people examining something interesting together. He didn't mention the temple or the code or trials or the formal structure of apprenticeship. He talked about the living Force the way someone talks about a river they have known their whole life, not explaining it, pointing at it, watching the boy watch it. The boy listened with everything he had. This time, someone was listening back. 5 weeks after the liberation, Naboo's lake country was completely itself again. Green hills ran down to water so still in the early morning that sky and reflection were indistinguishable from each other, the world meeting itself at a line of absolute quiet. Mist moved above the surface in slow drifts. The sun came up through the mist and diffused before arriving, and everything the light touched became something softer than what it had been. Anakin and Ahsoka sat at the edge of an overlook above the water, not planning, not reviewing, not preparing for the next thing, simply sitting, the kind that becomes possible when there is nothing left to plan and nothing left to dread, and the body has finally received permission to stop treating stillness as the interval before something worse arrives. I keep expecting to feel different, Anakin said. How do you feel? He thought about it. The question deserved the real answer. Like I'm waiting for the bill. You've been carrying something so long you don't have a reference point for what your own weight is without it, Ahsoka said. He stopped. That's probably accurate. She watched the mist move above the water. She's growing 7 things in desert sand. He's teaching a moisture evaporator new tricks. Qui-Gon is meeting with the council twice a month, and Yoda has apparently stopped arguing with him. She let it sit. We did this. He looked at the lake. First time around, he said, there was always something next. A mission. A crisis. An emergency that needed both of us, and needed it immediately. We never had. He gestured at the water, the morning, the uncomplicated absence of urgency. This, I know, she said. Does it bother you? She turned the question over, which meant she was going to answer it honestly rather than reassuringly. No, she said. I think this is what it was for. All of it. Everything we carried across the whole distance of everything that happened to us. This is what carrying it was supposed to make possible. He nodded. She hadn't said, everything we lost. She hadn't said, everything that was taken. She'd said everything we carried, which put the agency with the carriers rather than the circumstances, which was the most Ahsoka thing she had ever said, and the truest version of how she had always moved through the world. He thought about that for a long time, about the difference between what is done to you and what you carry forward from it, the gap between those two things being, he was beginning to understand, the only space in which a person actually lives. You did not choose the damage. You chose what you became in response to it. He had made a terrible choice with that space, for a long time. He had been given another chance at the question and had answered it differently. And the answer, sitting here at this overlook with the mist moving off the water and 30 years of irreversible history behind him that was no longer irreversible, felt like the only one that had ever made sense. He thought about the boy in the garden, the boy who would grow up with his mother, and with Qui-Gon's patient attention and with the Force as something vast and curious, rather than something he had to hide inside himself and carry in the dark. The boy who had held a lightsaber and seen a vision of a future that was no longer his, and taken the correction with the simplicity of someone young enough to genuinely believe that things could be different, because they had not yet lived long enough to know how rarely different arrives on schedule and how much it matters when it does. The lake held the sky. The morning continued without pressure. He thought, this is enough. This, specifically, is enough. He felt it first, not a warning, a completion. The sensation of a breath that has been held encountering the moment of release, the body already beginning to let go before the breath has actually moved. Something in the Force settling around them the way a tide settles at the shore it was always approaching. Unhurried, inevitable, not an arrival so much as a recognition. Ahsoka felt it too. He knew from the way she went still, not the stillness of alertness, but the stillness of a person who has recognized something they already knew was coming. It's time, she said. Yes, she turned to look at him. Her eyes were exactly what they had always been, clear, fully present, the eyes of someone who looked away from hard things exactly once in her life and spent everything after that making sure it never happened again. Snips, he said. Sky Guy, she replied. The oldest name, said without the humor that had always armored it, just the word itself. Returned to what it had always really meant beneath the armor, which was you, and specifically you, and everything that entails. He reached out and gripped her forearm. She gripped his. The soldier's hold. The same grip from the desert, from the sand and the twin suns and the very beginning of all of this. The last time. The warmth came first. Not heat. Warmth originates differently than heat. It moved through him the way the Force had moved in those first desert moments, vast, immediate, unobstructed, but now moving in the opposite direction, not entering. Returning, the distinction mattered more than he could have said. The edges of things became less fixed. Gently, the way a page softens at its edges in strong light, the line between the word and the space around it becoming a matter of attention rather than fact. He was aware of the lake and the morning and the mist and Ahsoka's grip on his arm, and all of it was present and vivid and equally real, and then it was not less. It was more, expanded past the dimensions a single body contains, past the edge of the overlook and the lake and the hillside, into something that had been there beneath everything the entire time, patient and enormous, simply waiting to receive them back when the work was finished. Not an ending, a returning. The chord the cosmic force struck the moment two people made a vow in the sand, resolving at last into its final note. The overlook was empty. The lake held an uninterrupted sky. The morning continued without pause. Because mornings do not pause, and the galaxy's story does not pause, and this is not a failure of the story but its greatest success, that the world continues, intact and corrected, without the hands that corrected it. On Tatooine, in the early morning before the twin suns have cleared the eastern ridge, a boy looks up from the garden. He has no reason to. His mother hasn't called him. Nothing has shifted in the immediate vicinity of the irrigation line he's tending. The seventh small green thing is doing exactly what it has been doing for a week, growing, incrementally and without announcement, toward the light it's been promised. He looks up anyway. The sky above the eastern ridge is the color of the space between night and day, not dark, not bright, something that lives between them with no single name. The twin suns are still below the rock line, their light arriving ahead of them the way a sound sometimes travels ahead of whatever made it, turning the sky above the ridge a color that is close to gold and not quite anything else. He stays like that for a long moment. Hands in the soil, face toward the sky. And through the connection he has carried since before he could name it, the one that runs through everything, linking the living earth under his hands to the pre-dawn light above his head to the quiet sound of his mother moving inside the house. Through that connection he feels something he doesn't have words for yet. Something warm and large and undemanding. Something that arrived and is departing in the same moment, like a world exhaling after holding its breath for a very long time. He doesn't know what it is. He knows it's good. His mother appears in the doorway. "Ani," she said. Breakfast, he looks at the sky one more moment. Holds whatever passed through him, whatever arrived, whatever is departing, whatever will take him years to understand. Then he smiles. Just that. Small and complete, and belonging entirely to the morning and to no one else. He turns back to the garden. His hands find the soil. The seventh green thing continues its work, growing in the direction it was always going to grow, which is toward the light, which has never been in any direction except up. The galaxy's story continues. But this story, the vow two people made in the sand, carried across impossible distances, kept in full, is complete. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.